The moment I discovered my wife's infidelity is etched into my mind like a scar, a painful reminder of a love I thought was unbreakable. It was a Tuesday evening, the kind of night that feels ordinary until it is. I remember the dull hum of the fluorescent lights in our kitchen, the smell of the spaghetti sauce simmering on the stove, and the sound of my daughter's laughter drifting in from the living room. I was preparing for a quiet dinner, just the three of us, when my phone buzzed with a message. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize. "You need to know what's happening. Meet me at the cafe on 5th." My heart raced. My first instinct was to dismiss it as a prank, but something nagged at me. I glanced at my wife, Corinne, who was lost in her phone, her fingers dancing across the screen with a fervor that felt too intense for a simple chat. The air thickened with tension. I made an excuse to step out, telling her I needed to run an errand. I drove to the cafe, each passing block amplifying the dread in my stomach. What was I about to uncover? As I parked and stepped inside, I spotted a familiar face, Emily, a mutual friend, looking pale and anxious. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know how else to tell you." The words spilled out of her like a torrent. Corinne had been seeing someone else, someone I knew, someone I trusted. My mind raced as I tried to process the betrayal. I felt like I was watching a slow-motion train wreck, unable to avert my gaze. My heart sank deeper with every word, each revelation twisting the knife of disbelief further into my chest. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice trembling. "This can't be true." "I wish it weren't," Emily replied, her eyes filled with pity. "But I saw them together last week. I thought you deserved to know." I stumbled out of the cafe, the world around me blurring as I tried to make sense of it all. I could barely breathe, my chest constricted by a mix of shock and anger. How could she do this to us? To our family? My thoughts raced back to the moments we'd shared, the laughter, the dreams, the promises of forever. I felt like a fool, standing there with my heart exposed, vulnerable and raw. When I returned home, Corinne was still in the kitchen, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing inside me. I watched her for a moment, the woman I had loved for nearly a decade, the mother of my child. She looked so normal, so unsuspecting, and yet the reality of her betrayal loomed over me like a dark cloud. "Hey, honey," she said, glancing up from her phone. "How was your errand?" "Fine," I replied, my voice flat. I couldn't bring myself to say anything more. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, teetering between love and betrayal, and I didn't know which way to fall. The laughter of my daughter echoed in my mind, a reminder of everything that was at stake. As I sat down at the dinner table, the weight of the discovery settled heavily on my shoulders. I stared at the spaghetti, the steam rising like the remnants of my shattered trust. The love I thought was unbreakable was fracturing before my eyes, and I was left to pick up the pieces. I realized then that I had a choice to make. I could confront Corinne, demand answers, or I could bury myself in the pain of her betrayal. I knew that whatever path I chose would shape the rest of my life. This was just the beginning of my journey, the first step into a world filled with confusion and heartache. I had no idea what lay ahead, but one thing was clear. I wouldn't wait for her to figure things out. The next few days were a blur of emotions, a whirlwind that left me dizzy and disoriented. I moved through life like a ghost, floating around the edges of my own existence. Each morning I would wake up, my heart heavy with the weight of betrayal, only to face another day of pretending everything was fine for our daughter's sake. I put on a brave face, but inside I was crumbling. I couldn't shake the feeling of anger that simmered just below the surface. It was a familiar emotion, but this time it felt different, more potent, more destructive. I found myself replaying the moments we'd shared, searching for clues, for signs that I had missed. Had I been so blind to her unhappiness? The thought gnawed at me. How could I have not seen it coming? Every time I looked at Corinne, I felt like I was staring at a stranger. The woman I had loved, who had stood by my side through thick and thin, was now the source of my deepest pain. I watched her move around the house, carrying on with her daily routine, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. It was infuriating. How could she act as if nothing had changed? One evening, after tucking our daughter into bed, I confronted her. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady but my heart racing. The air between us felt electric, charged with unspoken words. Karen looked up from her phone, surprise flickering across her face. "About what?" she asked, feigning innocence. "About us. About what you've been doing." I felt a surge of adrenaline as I finally voiced the truth. Her expression shifted, and for a brief moment I saw fear in her eyes. "What do you mean?" She replied, her voice trembling slightly. "You know exactly what I mean," I said, my frustration boiling over. "Emily told me everything. You've been seeing someone else." The silence that followed was deafening. I could see her processing the words, the reality of my accusation sinking in. I didn't want you to find out this way," she stammered, her defenses crumbling. "Then how did you want me to find out? Did you think I'd just wait around while you figured things out?" I snapped, my voice rising. The hurt and betrayal spilled out of me like a dam breaking. "I was confused," she said, her eyes welling with tears. "I didn't mean for it to happen. I thought I could make sense of it all without hurting you." "Confused?" I echoed, incredulous. "You think that's an excuse? You've broken my trust, Karen. You've shattered everything we built together." Her tears flowed freely now, and I felt a pang of sympathy mixed with my anger. But I couldn't allow myself to soften. I had to stand firm. "I need to know why," I demanded. "What was missing in our life that made you seek someone else?" "Everything felt so stagnant," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I could find something more, something I lost along the way." I shook my head, feeling a mix of disbelief and sadness. "And you thought cheating was the answer. Did you even consider how it would affect our family, our daughter?" "I didn't think," she said, her voice breaking. "I was selfish. I thought I could explore my feelings without it affecting you. I thought you'd understand." "Understand?" I scoffed, my heart racing with a mix of rage and sorrow. "You can't just throw everything away and expect me to stand by while you figure out your midlife crisis. This isn't just about you anymore." The conversation spiraled into a bitter exchange, filled with accusations and hurtful words. As I listened to her excuses, I felt my heart hardening. I had given her everything, my love, my trust, my commitment, and she had thrown it all away in a moment of weakness. The anger bubbled over, and I knew I had to take control of my life. In the days that followed, I found myself grappling with a storm of conflicting emotions. I was angry, yes, but there was also a sense of betrayal that felt like a heavy cloak draped over my shoulders. I reflected on the years we had spent together, the dreams we had shared, and the love that had once felt so solid. Now it felt like sand slipping through my fingers. I began to question everything, our past, our future, and even myself. Had I been a good husband? Had I missed the signs that she was unhappy? Did I somehow contribute to her decision to seek comfort elsewhere? The self-doubt crept in like a shadow, whispering insidious thoughts that only deepened my despair. But amid the turmoil, something began to shift within me. I realized that I couldn't allow her actions to define my worth. I had to reclaim my life, to find a path forward that didn't include waiting for her to figure things out. It was a sobering realization, but it also felt empowering. I understood now that I had a choice, to wallow in the pain or to rise above it. I chose the latter. I wouldn't let her betrayal dictate the course of my life any longer. I was determined to find my own happiness, even if it meant stepping away from the woman I had once loved so fiercely. As I lay in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, I felt a flicker of hope. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to take the first steps toward a new beginning. I would no longer be a passive participant in my own life. I would reclaim my narrative, my story. The decision to move on wasn't made in a single moment. It was a gradual awakening, a realization that unfolded like the petals of a flower. After that explosive conversation with Karen, I spent countless hours in a haze of anger and confusion. I replayed every moment, every word exchanged, and I began to understand that I was at a crossroads. I could either wait for her to come back to me, begging for forgiveness, or I could take charge of my own life. The choice felt monumental. On one hand, there was the familiar comfort of our shared history, the laughter, the love, the dreams we had woven together over the years. On the other hand, there was the stark reality of betrayal, the gnawing feeling that the woman I had trusted had turned her back on everything we had built. It was a painful juxtaposition, and I felt like I was being pulled in two different directions. I spent the next few days reflecting on our relationship, analyzing the cracks that had formed beneath the surface. I remembered the moments when Corinne seemed distant, when she would scroll through her phone during dinner or come home late from work with vague excuses. I had brushed them off, convincing myself that it was just the stress of life. But now, in the aftermath of her betrayal, those moments took on a new meaning. They were signs, warnings I had ignored, and they stung with the realization that I had been blind to her unhappiness. One evening, as I sat alone on the couch, I felt a surge of determination. I couldn't keep living in this limbo, waiting for her to figure things out. I deserved better than that. I had devoted my life to our family, and now it was time to devote some of that energy to myself. I made a silent vow. I would not be a victim in this story. I started to envision what my life could look like without her. I thought about the hobbies I had shelved away, painting, hiking, and even writing. I had always been passionate about storytelling, but I had let it slip through my fingers as I focused on being a husband and a father. It was time to reclaim those parts of myself that I had sacrificed. I began taking small steps toward a new beginning. I signed up for a weekend painting class at a local community center, something I had always wanted to try but never found the time for. The first time I dipped my brush into the vibrant colors, I felt a rush of exhilaration. It was liberating to express myself creatively, to lose myself in the strokes of the brush. I could feel the weight of my anger and sadness slowly lifting, replaced by a sense of empowerment. At work, I started to engage more with my colleagues, initiating conversations and forming connections that had been overshadowed by my marriage. I joined a local running group, pushing myself physically while also meeting new people. Each mile I ran felt like a release, a way to channel my emotions into something positive. I discovered a newfound sense of strength within me, a resilience that I hadn't known existed. The more I focused on myself, the more I realized that I had been living in the shadow of our relationship for far too long. I had poured my energy into making Corinne happy, often at the expense of my own happiness. It was time to shift that focus back to me. I started to set personal goals, reading more, taking short trips, and even planning a solo vacation. The idea of exploring new places on my own filled me with excitement and anticipation. As I began to rebuild my life, I also sought support from friends who had been there for me during this tumultuous time. I opened up about my feelings, sharing the depth of my betrayal and the journey I was embarking on. Their encouragement fueled my resolve, reminding me that I wasn't alone in this. It was liberating to share my story, to let go of the burden I had been carrying in silence. But despite the progress I was making, the reality of Corinne's betrayal still lingered in the back of my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling of anger that would occasionally bubble up, especially when I would see her scrolling through her phone with that same intensity. I knew I had to confront her again, to lay my boundaries and make it clear that I was moving on. One evening, as we sat across from each other at the dinner table, I took a deep breath and spoke my truth. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," I began, my voice steady. "I'm not going to wait for you to figure things out. I'm moving on with my life." Corinne's fork clattered against her plate, her eyes widening in surprise. "What do you mean?" she asked, confusion and hurt etched on her face. "I mean that I deserve more than being a placeholder while you sort out your feelings. I'm reclaiming my life, and that includes my happiness," I stated firmly. "I didn't think you would take it this far," she replied, her voice trembling. "I thought we could work through this." "Work through what?" "The fact that you chose someone else over our family. I can't do this anymore, Corinne. I'm done waiting." The conversation became heated again, but this time I stood my ground. It was a liberating experience, knowing that I was no longer a passive participant in my own life. I was ready to embrace the uncertainty of the future, to forge a new path forward, even if it meant stepping away from the woman I had once loved deeply. As I lay in bed that night, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I had made my decision, and it felt right. I was no longer bound by the past. I was free to explore my own identity and find joy in the journey ahead. I knew the road would be long and filled with challenges, but I was ready to face them head on. I had taken back control of my life, and that was the first step toward healing. Rebuilding my life after the discovery of Corinne's infidelity felt like constructing a house from the ground up. Each day, I laid a new brick, carefully choosing where to place it, ensuring it was solid and secure. The first few weeks were the most challenging, as I navigated the emotional debris left in the wake of our shattered relationship. But as time passed, I began to see glimpses of hope and renewal. The painting class I had signed up for became a sanctuary for me. Each Saturday morning, I would arrive at the community center, my heart racing with anticipation. The instructor was an older woman with a gentle spirit and a passion for art that was contagious. She encouraged us to express our emotions on the canvas, to let our feelings guide our brushstrokes. I found myself pouring my heart into each piece, using colors to represent the chaos and confusion swirling inside me. In one session, I painted a stormy sea, dark blues and grays swirling together, capturing the tumult of my emotions. But as I continued to paint, I added streaks of bright yellow, representing hope and resilience breaking through the darkness. That painting became a turning point for me, a visual representation of my journey from despair to empowerment. Outside of art, I also began to explore new passions. I dusted off my running shoes and joined a local running group, something I had always wanted to do but never prioritized. The first few runs were tough, my body protesting against the sudden exertion. But with each step, I felt a sense of liberation, the rhythm of my feet hitting. The pavement became a meditative practice, allowing me to clear my mind and focus on the present moment. I met new friends in the running group, people who shared my enthusiasm for fitness and adventure. We would chat about our lives, our struggles, and our triumphs, creating a sense of camaraderie that I had longed for. I felt alive again, like I was rediscovering parts of myself that had been buried under the weight of my marriage. One of the runners, a woman named Lisa, became a close friend. She was vibrant and full of life, always encouraging me to push my limits. We started going on weekend hikes together, exploring trails I had never ventured on before. As we climbed mountains and traversed valleys, I felt a sense of freedom that I hadn't experienced in years. It was exhilarating to challenge myself physically and emotionally, to embrace the beauty of nature while letting go of my past. While I was busy building a new life, I also made a conscious effort to establish boundaries with Corinne. We had a few tense conversations about co-parenting, and I realized that I needed to approach our interactions with a level head. I started to communicate clearly about our daughter's needs, focusing on what was best for her rather than getting caught up in the emotional turmoil between us. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when anger threatened to resurface, but I reminded myself of my commitment to moving forward. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, Corinne called. I hesitated before answering, knowing that our conversations often spiraled into arguments. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice soft. "What about?" I replied cautiously. "I miss our family, I miss you," she admitted, and I could hear the sincerity in her voice. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words. "I'm focused on rebuilding my life right now, Corinne. I can't go back to how things were." "I know I messed up. I'm working on myself too," she said, her tone earnest. "I just want to find a way for us to co-parent peacefully." I was struck by her vulnerability. It was the first time I had heard her acknowledge her mistakes without defensiveness. It made me realize that while I couldn't forget what had happened, I could choose to move forward with grace. "Let's put our daughter first," I said, my voice steady. "We can work together for her sake." As we continued to talk, I felt a shift in our dynamic. There was a sense of mutual respect that hadn't been present before. I could see that she was genuinely trying to improve, and while I wasn't ready to fully trust her again, I was open to rebuilding a functional relationship for our daughter's sake. In the following weeks, I continued to focus on my personal growth. I took a weekend trip to the mountains, seeking solitude and clarity. I hiked alone, surrounded by nature, and allowed myself to reflect on my journey. I wrote in my journal, pouring out my thoughts and feelings, processing the pain and anger that still lingered. Each word was cathartic, a release of the emotions I had bottled up for too long. During these moments of solitude, I began to understand the importance of self-discovery. I realized that I had spent so much time trying to make Corinne happy that I had neglected my own needs and desires. I had to learn to prioritize myself, to embrace my individuality, and to find joy in my own accomplishments. Back home, I continued to embrace the changes I had made. I decorated my living space with my paintings, transforming my home into a sanctuary of creativity. I filled the walls with vibrant colors, each piece reflecting my journey from heartbreak to healing. Friends began to notice the transformation, and they would often comment on how alive I seemed. One evening, as I prepared for a small gathering with friends, I felt a sense of pride in how far I had come. I was no longer defined by my marriage or my wife's betrayal. I was carving out a new identity, one that was rooted in strength and resilience. As my friends arrived, laughter filled the room, mingling with the aroma of food I had prepared. I felt a warmth in my heart, a sense of belonging and community that I had longed for. I realized that while my journey had been painful, it had also opened the door to new friendships and experiences. I was no longer waiting for Corinne to figure things out. I was actively creating my own path. And in that moment, surrounded by friends and laughter, I understood that life was a series of choices. I had chosen to rise above the pain, to embrace the unknown, and to build a life that was authentically mine. As I continued to rebuild my life, I found myself reflecting on my relationship with Corinne more deeply than I had in years. The more I explored my emotions and embraced my newfound independence, the more I began to understand the dynamics that had shaped our marriage. It was a complex web of love, trust, and ultimately betrayal, and I felt compelled to untangle it. I remembered the early days of our relationship, the spark that had drawn us together, the laughter that had filled our home. We were young and in love, two idealistic souls dreaming of a future full of adventure. I cherished those memories, the moments when we had danced in the kitchen, shared late-night talks, and planned our lives together. But as time wore on, the weight of responsibilities and the grind of everyday life began to take its toll. I reflected on the moments when Corinne had seemed distant, the times I had brushed off her discontent as mere stress. It was easy to dismiss her feelings, to convince myself that everything was fine, but now, in the wake of her betrayal, I saw those moments in a new light. I had failed to listen, to truly hear her when she expressed her unhappiness. I had been so focused on providing for our family that I had neglected the emotional connection we once shared. In my quiet moments of reflection, I also recognized the ways in which I had contributed to the disconnection. I had been preoccupied with work, often bringing stress home and allowing it to seep into our relationship. I had taken her for granted, assuming that love was enough to carry us through the tough times. I had not nurtured our bond, and I had not prioritized the intimacy that had once brought us together. As I processed these realizations, I felt a mixture of sadness and clarity. I was saddened by the loss of what we had once had, but I also felt empowered by the knowledge that relationships require effort from both partners. It was a lesson I would carry with me as I moved forward, whether I was co-parenting with Corinne or forging new connections in my life. One evening, after a particularly long day, I found myself sitting on my couch, staring at the paintings that adorned my walls. Each piece told a story of my journey, my pain, my anger, and ultimately, my healing. I realized that I had transformed my heartbreak into something beautiful, something that reflected my growth. I began to think about Corinne and the choices she had made. I understood that her infidelity was not just about a moment of weakness. It was a symptom of deeper issues within our relationship. She had sought solace in another person when she felt unheard and unappreciated. While it didn't excuse her actions, it helped me empathize with her struggles. As I continued to navigate my feelings, I also recognized the importance of forgiveness, not just for Corinne, but for myself. I had carried the weight of anger and resentment for too long, and it was time to let it go. I had to forgive her for the betrayal, not because she deserved it, but because I needed to free myself from the burden of those emotions. Holding onto anger was like holding onto a heavy anchor that weighed me down. I needed to release it to move forward. One night, as I lay in bed, I made a conscious decision to forgive, both Corinne and myself. I acknowledged the pain of the past, but I refused to let it dictate my future. I was ready to embrace a new chapter in my life, one that was filled with possibilities and opportunities for growth. In the weeks that followed, I approached my interactions with Corinne with a renewed sense of clarity. We communicated more openly about our daughter and the co-parenting arrangements, focusing on what was best for her. I felt a shift in our dynamic, a sense of mutual respect that had been absent before. It was not about rekindling our romantic relationship, but rather about finding a way to coexist peacefully for our child. As I reflected on our marriage, I also recognized the strength I had gained through this experience. I had learned to prioritize my own happiness, to seek fulfillment outside of our relationship, and to embrace my individuality. I had discovered a resilience within me that I hadn't known existed, a strength that would carry me forward, no matter what challenges lay ahead. I began to envision my future without the shadow of betrayal looming over me. I saw myself as a loving father, a creative individual, and a man who had weathered the storm and emerged stronger. I was no longer defined by my past. I was shaping my own identity, one that was rooted in self-worth and resilience. In those quiet moments of reflection, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I had come to terms with my relationship with Corinne, acknowledging both the love we had shared and the pain that had followed. I understood that while our marriage may have ended, the lessons I learned would stay with me forever. As I closed my eyes that night, I felt a sense of hope for the future. I was ready to embrace whatever came next, knowing that I had the strength to face it. I had learned to love myself again, and with that love came the promise of new beginnings. As I stood at the precipice of my new life, I could finally see the horizon stretch out before me, painted in vibrant colors of hope and possibility. The journey had been long and arduous, filled with moments of pain and self-reflection, but it had also been a path of profound growth. I had emerged from the ashes of my marriage not just as a survivor of betrayal, but as a man renewed. The weeks turned into months, and I continued to embrace the changes I had initiated. I found joy in the little things, a morning run that filled my lungs with fresh air, an evening spent painting under the soft glow of a lamp, and laughter shared with friends who had become my chosen family. I was learning to live for myself again, and it felt liberating. One afternoon, I took my daughter to the park, a place we often visited as a family. As she played on the swings, I watched her with a sense of pride and love that filled my heart. My relationship with Corinne had shifted into a new phase, one defined by respect and cooperation. We had established a routine that allowed us to co-parent effectively, putting our daughter's needs first. I had learned to appreciate the moments we shared as a family, even if they were tinged with the remnants of what had once been. I could see that Corinne was making an effort to be a better person, a better mother. It was a bittersweet realization, but it reinforced my decision to forgive her. I had let go of the anger that had once consumed me, and in its place I found a sense of peace. As I sat on the park bench, I felt a wave of nostalgia wash over me. I thought about the love story Corinne and I had once shared, the dreams we had built together and the life we had envisioned. But I also understood that love is not always enough. It requires constant nurturing, communication, and understanding. Our story had taken a different route, but it was still a part of who I was. In the months that followed, I continued to explore my passions and interests. I signed up for a writing workshop, where I began to craft stories that reflected my experiences. Writing became a therapeutic outlet, a way to articulate my emotions and share my journey with others. I poured my heart into my work, drawing upon the lessons I had learned about love, loss, and resilience. I eventually completed a collection of essays that chronicled my journey through heartbreak and healing. It was cathartic to put my experiences into words, to share my story with others who might be navigating similar challenges. I hoped that by being vulnerable, I could inspire others to find their own strength in the face of adversity. One evening, as I sat in my living room surrounded by my paintings and notebooks, I received a message from Corinne. "Can we talk?" It read. I felt a flutter of anxiety in my stomach, but I knew that I had established a new foundation of respect between us. I agreed to meet her for coffee the next day. When we sat down across from each other, I could see the sincerity in her eyes. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she began, her voice steady. "I want to apologize for everything. I didn't realize how much I had hurt you until I saw you moving on and finding happiness." I took a breath, feeling the weight of her words. "Thank you for saying that. It means a lot to me," I replied, my heart open to the conversation. "I've learned to forgive you for what happened, but I need you to understand that I won't go back to how things were. We can't change the past, but we can create a new future for our daughter." We talked for hours, sharing our thoughts and feelings in a way we had never done before. It was a healing conversation, one that acknowledged the pain but also celebrated the progress we had both made. We agreed to continue working together as co-parents, focused on providing a stable and loving environment for our daughter. As I left the cafe, I felt a sense of closure wash over me. I had finally come to terms with my past, and I was ready to embrace the future. I understood now that moving on didn't mean erasing the memories or the love I had once felt. It meant learning from them and allowing them to shape the person I had become. I had learned the importance of self-worth, resilience, and the power of forgiveness. I was no longer waiting for someone else to define my happiness. I was actively creating it for myself. I had emerged from the darkness stronger, wiser, and more in tune with my own desires and needs. As I walked home that evening, a sense of lightness filled my heart. I was ready to face whatever came next: new adventures, new relationships, and new opportunities for growth. I knew that life would continue to throw challenges my way, but I also knew that I had the strength to navigate them. And so, I stepped into my future with hope and determination, ready to embrace the journey ahead. I had learned to love myself again, and with that love came the promise of new beginnings. The horizon was bright, and I was excited to see where it would lead me. With every step I took, I felt more and more like the author of my own story, and I was determined to make it a beautiful one.